Arleną Witt is our next guest. A warm welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I honestly don't even know where to begin because it usually doesn't happen. It's a bit of a surreal moment for me, having you sitting in front of me. First of all, as a journalist, I typically refrain from giving compliments. I try to stay as objective as much as I can. But with you, I simply cannot. I've been watching and learning from your videos ever since I was 18 years old, give or take. And, back then it was a bit of a turning point for me because I was applying for international baccalaureate programs. I was preparing for the exams. I was learning the language, and you were the prominent figure of that. So I get these flashbacks now, which is a bunch of emotions running through my head. It's excitement, it's disbelief, it's happiness. I think two words that I can use now, simple words, but deeply heartfelt, is thank you. And I think I speak for myself, but also for hundreds of thousands of people who watch your content. It's just the impact you've had on people, on me, and I think it's tremendous. So thank you for that. And you see, with thank you, it's the case that we use it on a daily basis. We thank people at the shop. We thank the cashier. We thank somebody who gives up their seat on the bus. We thank someone who holds the door open for us. But it's not always sincere, meaning it's just what we're used to. There's many times the politeness aspect is not there. And with you, I think I want you to know that it is there.
It's not polite, it's sincere.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay, you're welcome. I'm happy I was able to help.
And well, without further ado, I think we can just delve into that. I think this is going to be really interesting because I see a lot of contrast between what I do, what you do. I'm at the very beginning of my professional journey. You have quite some experience teaching.
Yes, I'm almost retired. Mm-hmm.
And I do interviews, so the methodology is different. I have a guest. There's a different dynamic. We play with the language, different accents. You see the different analogy because first of all, you record solo. You use Polish. You teach English by explaining things in Polish.
Right.
I don't. Here we focus solely on English. It's a 1 hour long interviews in English. And you also do it differently. Like there's unconventional way of doing it, meaning you put excerpts of movies, for example, right? Mm-hmm. So you teach the real and authentic language. And I think this is what we have in common. But there's contrast. I'm showing that there's a lot of judgment in today's society. I think as Poles, we judge people way more than ourselves. For that reason, we don't speak the language. So contrast. Again, you have a different educational background. You did the English studies. I didn't. I did the political science. So contrasts. And I think it's really interesting to discuss things related to English because that's the focus of today's episode. We're going to be talking about that. And I want to start with this. I'd like you to share your story, the beginnings of how you started learning the language. The floor is yours.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for your kind words. I'm always surprised when someone tells me that they've been learning with my videos for years or ever since I was a teenager or ever since I was a kid, because it seems to me like I only started doing it 10 years ago, which in my life, I'm 45 this year. So 35 to 45 is not that big of a difference. Mm-hmm. But for someone who was watching me when they started and they were 10 and now they're 20, that's half their life. And it's the most crucial part of their life.
That's true.
It's the part that they remember most. So that's fun. Fun to hear. I'm very happy you found my videos useful. That's what they're for. How I started learning. So when I was 9, my dad found this ad on a local store, that someone's an English tutor and they welcome new students. And he talked to me about it, and he asked whether I'd like to go and start learning English. And that was the time when people didn't really go to any extra classes after school. We also considered me going to a music school, but we figured, I can't remember whether it was my choice or we discussed it together, but they seemed like two options that excluded one another. So we thought that if I go to music school, I wouldn't be able to study English, and vice versa. There wouldn't be enough time. So I think it was my dad who suggested that I study English instead of music, because, as he said, that could be my job in the future.
And he was right about that.
He was right about that. But, you know, it's of course not true that music cannot be your job, right? I guess he just felt that it's less likely to make a living.
A gut feeling that father perhaps had.
Yeah, maybe. I think he also had a flair for languages, and he had been studying German for a while. But he never got to a proficiency level that he was satisfied with, I guess. He couldn't really afford private lessons. Private lessons at the time weren't really available too. So if you wanted to study a language, you had to get lucky to have a teacher nearby. And so we went to see this teacher who taught me at home. She was 16 years old at the time. I was 9. So for me, she was, you know, an adult. And she was very mature for her age. She basically taught me the way that she had been taught from, you know, the books that were available at the time. I guess they were published in late 80s. Well, it was 1989, so that must have been 80s. And I really enjoyed the lessons. It was once a week, a 90-minute lesson, Friday after school, 4 p.m. I still remember. Because when I went out to play outside after school and it was time to go to my class, I always felt kind of sad that I had to leave my friends and, you know, go home, get my notebook, and then get to class. And I was actually passing them by. You know, they were playing outside, and I was walking past them,
looking at them, having fun, and all
having
that.
fun. And I was going to my class, which I also enjoyed. You know, but I felt like I couldn't be in two places at the same time, right? And I was always missing out on something. And I went to see her for 4 years. Once a week, every Friday.
Every Friday. No
Every
exceptions.
Friday. Well, except for, you know, summer vacation and Christmas or spring break, whatever.
Partnerem podcastu jest Tutlo, szkoła angielskiego online, która tak jak ja pomaga przełamywać bariery w mówieniu.
And I had a lot of fun. I felt like I was learning a lot, but my parents didn't speak any English, so they couldn't really tell if I was, you know, making
Progress.
They knew I was making progress. I guess they weren't able to evaluate if, you know, it made sense or if it was going the way that it was supposed to be going. I don't know the right way, but, you know, you have some expectations. It's been 3 or 4 years, right? You're supposed to be able to say something in in the language. So I guess it was about after 3 years that they hired another teacher for like an hour or two to evaluate me. And it was basically a conversation. You know, first my dad was there at first, and then he left the room, and I stayed there with the teacher, and he was asking me questions.
How did it go?
I mean, I can't really remember all of it, but it was fine. You know, I was able to answer his questions. I remember him asking me, how many lessons a week do you have? And I said 2. And he said, so what days are you going to those lessons? And I said, Friday. But you said you had 2 lessons. I said, well, yeah, they're once a week. Because for me, 90 minutes was 2 lessons, right? So they were just
2 times 45.
Yeah,
If you look at
so 2 lessons. So that's the only thing I remember. And then after we spoke, I can't remember how long it took, maybe half an hour. The teacher invited my dad to the room and said, yeah, I think it's fine. You know, the way that she's supposed to be going, it's okay. I mean, you can keep doing it. So it makes sense. And then one of my parents lost their job. The lessons were expensive, of course, because it was, you know, private tuition. And at the same time, a foreign language school opened up in my hometown. And so they decided that I would quit the private lessons and instead go take a course. And so that was the first time that I started studying with a group, which was kind of intimidating at first because I was embarrassed to speak in English in front of anyone else except for my teacher.
You're put in this uncomfortable position in a way.
Yeah.
Among your peers.
Well, they weren't peers actually,
You're older.
because I was the youngest person in the group.
That's even more intimidating.
Yeah, yeah. I was 13. And then we had 2 high school students in the group. Then there were a couple of university students, and the rest were adults. So I was the baby in the group. And it was the first time that I would commute on my own, go somewhere further than just my school, which was in my neighborhood. We finished the classes at 8:20 p.m. and I had to get back home on my own. As a 13, 14-year-old girl, people don't really do that now, right? They don't let their young teens move around after dark. But that course was 3 years in my hometown and then another 2 in the neighboring town, because when I was going to continue with the rising levels of proficiency, they didn't have the group that I needed in my hometown, but they had another office in another town, so then I commuted even further away from home. And when I finished that, so I took 3 Cambridge University exams year by year. So I took the first exam when I was 16, advanced at 17, and then proficiency at 18. And that was the same year when I was taking my finals in high school and my entry level exams to university. So basically I finished learning English at extra classes at the time, because when I started university, all my classes were in English. So
Obviously.
I didn't have to, study English as a subject anymore.
My story is quite different, if I may tell you my story.
Sure.
So it started later. I was about 13. Obviously, you have English classes before in your in secondary school. But I was 13, more or less, and I asked my mom to get me the CDs of Friends, the American series.
Yeah.
And she did. She gave me the 10, because there was 10 seasons.
10
I
seasons,
believe.
right.
She gave
236 episodes.
Wow, so many. She got the CDs and I put them on, and I remember it to date. Like I was watching it every day. It was holiday season, summer. I was watching it 5 hours a day, jotting down every word and expression that was used. First, I was watching it with Polish subtitles and then with English subtitles. I was rewatching it.
Okay, but you started watching it before learning any English at all?
I had like A2, B1, so that was quite challenging for me. I was using dictionary and all that, but I was writing things down. I was highlighting them. I was really motivated to learn. That's how it started. I remember to date, there was like expressions that I used, for example, pop the question.
Yeah.
And I was like, what does it mean? And then I have this flashback of like Ross and Rachel, obviously, knowing that.
Not on a break.
Not on a break, but pop the question popped up and it's still stuck in my head.
Yeah.
10 years, 12 years later. So that's how it started. Then I did some tutoring. Obviously, I attended some private classes, and I eventually, at the age of 17, I did the International Baccalaureate program. And that was the only program that was offered in my hometown, fully in English. So I was learning like biology, physics, geography, all in English. I was really thrown in at the deep end because that was really uncharted territory. But I was excited about that. It was also sort of like a flex for me as a kid to learn in a different language, I have to say. And that's how it started. Then I moved abroad to Netherlands and Belgium, and of course it continued there. So there was also this immersion process that happened, which we'll be getting into later on. So that's my story.
Okay.
More or
Sounds
less.
exciting. But you started, the first time you had an English lesson, you were
Probably
how
like
old?
9 also.
Okay.
But I get also flashbacks that I didn't really enjoy it. Back at school. Don't know why. I think I was just like a kid and I didn't bother learning the language, and I wasn't interested by it at the beginning. But then I got this fascination with the world of words. I was like, we'll be getting into that later on, but it started from a place that I didn't like it that much. And then I think Friends, this was the crucial turning point.
Okay.
I actually started liking it. With you today, I would like to debunk some myths about learning a language. And I think we can. There's a whole list of them. I jotted them down.
How much time do we have?
We have 1 hour. We'll make it. And I think it's going to be really interesting because we might have different views on that. And that's also fine. It's an open space. We can discuss it. And that's what we're here for. So I'm happy to do that, to get your expert opinion on that. And perhaps my more of a fresh, I don't know, newbie perspective, I could say, right? So let's just go one by one.
Okay, what's the first myth?
Let's do it. First myth, you need to be a language person to learn a language.
No.
The question, I guess, is there such a thing as linguistic predisposition?
Yeah.
So no or yes? Or is it not
Well,
mutually
you don't
exclusive?
have to be a language person, but there is such a thing as a language person. So, do you agree?
I think we are sort of wired in a certain way that you're more inclined to learn like about natural sciences or social sciences, right? So I was always the social science person, even like when it comes to like Polish literature, I like that. I didn't like maths. So I think this is the connection that I see.
Right.
This world of words, as I said, it was always sort of embedded in my head, ingrained. But I don't think it's a prerequisite.
Well, obviously, no.
Yeah.
But there are people, and I think you belong to that group, who have exceptional hearing, who are able to imitate sounds in a way that is more faithful to the original than other people, who have a keen interest in learning a language, who are very observant, who care about how you communicate. And that is what makes you a more, I don't want to say a better language learner or a faster language learner, but I guess it comes easier for you. Okay? So there are people who can spend the exact same amount of time studying, doing the exact same exercises and reading the exact same books, and they will not be able to speak as well as you. And it's not their fault. It's just that we have different talents, just like you have a talent for dancing or for any sport or for painting, right? I mean, there's no way that I'd be as good as a painter as Picasso, right? Because I don't have the talent for it. I can practice and my painting skills will definitely get better, but it won't be as easy and it won't be as high quality and it won't be as successful. That doesn't mean that I'm not going to learn, right? I'm going to learn and I'm going to be able to communicate. It will just not come as easy for me. So, and you don't have to have the talent to learn, right? You can still learn.
It's also about, I would say, intrinsic motivation. So like you need to have an interest and you need to be motivated to do it. It has to come from within you, right? So I'll give you an example.
Sure.
I always liked English and I liked learning it, but then I always hated German. And for some people, I think you speak German.
Yeah.
For some people, it's easy because it's like it's logical for them.
Yes.
The structure of a sentence, it's logical. For me, it's not for some reason. And I think I have this predisposition for languages, but not for German, because I never wanted to learn it in the first place. So it also comes from a place that you have to have this motivation and willingness to learn.
Yeah.
Would you agree with that?
Yeah, sure, yeah.
Second one. You need to be fluent to speak.
Obviously, no.
Yeah. And there's a lot of things here I want to discuss. So first of all, making mistakes, right? It is a crucial part of learning.
It's the only way you can learn, actually. You can't learn without making mistakes. Making mistakes is how we learn. That's how we test our theories, right? That's how babies learn to speak. That's how they learn to walk, right? It's not like today you can't walk and tomorrow you make the first step and then all your next steps are perfect. It just doesn't happen, right? You have to keep falling down and then you fall down less and less. And it's the same with language. You have to keep making mistakes because that's how you learn. So I think that the reason why it's hard sometimes is because we focus on those mistakes too much, right? Because we see them as failures.
They're not failures.
No,
It's just a journey
stepping
to get
stones.
to
Yeah,
exactly.
They're necessary. They're like experiments that didn't go the way that you hoped, right?
I like the sound of that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And fluency, it takes years of practice.
Right.
Right? And there's different components. There are different components. So we have reading, listening.
Yeah.
Right? Reading and listening is more of a passive
Right.
On a passive
Skill.
spectrum
Yeah,
of skill.
yeah.
And then we have speaking and help me out with that.
Writing.
Which is more of an active
Yep.
skill, right? So it's the combination of those things.
Right.
that come
These
into
are the
play.
4 language skills that you can have.
But we debunked the myth that you don't need to be fluent to speak.
No, you don't.
I like that.
You can just say one word and be understood, right? Like if you're abroad and you need to go to the bathroom, you can just say bathroom and people will know what you
And
mean.
it's a communication,
Yeah.
engagement and communication. So that's the key. Third one. You need to live in a country where the language is spoken to become fluent.
Nope.
Let's elaborate on that. I have a lot of thoughts on that, so
Okay.
I'll let you speak first.
It obviously helps. The one thing I want to clarify is it's not about the soil that you step on that will teach you the language. It's the people you surround yourself with. So if you go abroad and you don't speak to anybody, you're not going to learn the language. Or if you go abroad and you still spend time with Polish people, right? And you speak Polish every
I know
day.
so many instances of people who just went abroad and they stick to one group,
Yeah.
Polish people. And
Yeah.
how are you supposed to learn a language that
Yeah.
way?
So the best way to use that opportunity is to not have any Polish people around. So you find a American, let's say, American girlfriend, boyfriend, you go to an American office, you attend an American church, you find American friends, you hire an American nanny, and you just have to speak English then. And that is how it goes the easiest, I guess.
I see the connection again with the willingness. You really need to take that step and perhaps go out of your comfort zone and really try.
Right. But for some people, just the fact that they have, changed their lives and moved to another country, that's enough of going out of their comfort zone, right?
That's true.
That's why when they're there, they kind of have to find their own nook, to feel comfortable. And they feel like, okay, I'm in America. This is huge, right? Now I'm going to make myself feel safe again. So I'm going to find a Polish girlfriend and a Polish church and
Be
a
in
Polish
this bubble,
store.
right?
Yeah. And
Stay
so
within this
they've
bubble.
been living in Chicago for 20 years and they still speak, well, I don't want to say bad English, but they speak English that is enough, right? But it's far from advanced.
What you're saying is really crucial because there is a fine line between immersion and submersion. And this is what Radek Kotarski wrote in his book, Włam się do mózgu. There is a difference between the two. And he found out that partial immersion is way more efficient than submersion. Because when it comes to submersion, like fully immersing yourself, it also comes with a lot of stress, anxiety. And he wrote in a book, he gave an example of Alex. It was a guy who moved to Moscow to learn Russian. And he was a polyglot. He spoke, I think, 11 languages by the age of 20. And he was struggling a lot. The second he got off the plane, he couldn't read the Cyrillic signs. So he was struggling. Then he found himself struggling at the shop, the everyday tasks. He was struggling. What happened was that he was feeling anxious and stressed. And this stress, like he could feel physical pain, and headache, back pain, So he was thrown into the deep end. This is an example. And it's interesting because he was a polyglot. You see what I mean? So perhaps I just see a nice analogy here that like perhaps for some people, not full submersion, but immersion and partially like trying things out at their own pace is more efficient than fully just going all the way in. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, because you're expanding your comfort zone and not just going out of it. It's making baby steps. That's what I always encourage people to do. Baby steps. Like if you want to make progress, just read one sentence, right? That's how I started reading books again. When I had my baby, I found that I have very little time for reading and for other leisure activities. And I figured, okay, so what do? I'm not going to be able to read books the same way that I used to before I was a mom, right? I can't just sit in an armchair for 2 hours and enjoy a book, right? Because I have to be ready. I have to be on standby. So I figured, okay, well then why don't I find another way? And I got myself this dot pen that makes a huge dot.
Dot pen. What
Yeah,
is
it's a kind of a pen. It's a marker. It's a color marker that you can just touch the paper with, and it leaves a large dot.
All right.
Right. So I got myself a notebook, like a journal, and I wrote a couple of categories in it and the dates of the month. And whenever I did the thing that I wanted to do that day, I marked it with a dot. And so reading a book was one of them. And I figured I'm going to set a very low bar for myself, and the low bar will be one sentence. If I read just one sentence of a book that day, I can mark it with a dot. And that's what I did. So when I opened the journal at a certain point during the day, and I figured, oh, okay, I still haven't read anything today. Let me check. So I either opened my phone, because I always have an ebook on my phone that I started, or I have an e-reader, or I have a paper book, and I also have an audiobook. So I read 4 books at the same time, depending on what I can do at the time.
Obviously.
And so when I was, without my book, I just opened my phone and, okay, just one sentence. Done. And I can mark it with a dot. And even if it's just one sentence, and it doesn't matter if I read the book for 2 years, I move on, right? I'm making progress. It's a baby step, and that's enough.
It's a baby step, exactly, as you said. Moving on.
Sure.
4th one. Grammar rules are the most important part of learning a language.
No, they're not.
They're so obvious for us, but you see, for some reason, for some people, there might not be so obvious. So
Okay.
it's important to discuss them. I'm going to start.
Sure.
First of all, we should ask ourselves the question, why do I learn a language in the first place? Is it for, I don't know, leisure?
Leisure or leisure?
Leisure? You said leisure. Is it the difference between British, American?
Americans will usually
Leisure.
say leisure,
Leisure.
but I've heard leisure too, so it's fine.
For leisure activities. Is it for work? Maybe you want to become a CEO and you need that proficiency level of English. So this is the first question. Why do I learn the language? What's the goal behind it? And it depends on the goal. And in real life conversations, people don't really strict to follow. They don't really follow grammar rules sometimes. An example, right? Previously, I had the guest, and she said she was living in Ireland, and people there would say "I done" instead of "I've done" or "I did." So it's not a correct grammar, but they would use it, and people would understand. So again, real life conversations and more of a formal language, we need to distinguish between the two. And that's how I see it. So the question is crucial. Why do I learn a language for? What's the goal? What would you say to that?
So first of all, I don't think that people don't use grammar when they talk. They use grammar all the time. Because when we construct a sentence, there's a certain order of words that we need to put them in, right? The people in Ireland that you mentioned, they don't say done I, right? For some reason, they always start with I. The fact that they use a different form, a different verb form, that's just a detail, right? That doesn't prevent communication and understanding. So if you want to make yourself understood, it helps if you speak correctly because it's easier to follow. But if you don't speak correctly and people still understand you, then that's good enough, right? So if people, there's no way for anybody to speak perfect English, Polish, whatever. I am a native.
We make mistakes.
Exactly. I'm a native speaker of Polish and I make mistakes.
All the time.
Right? I mispronounce things or I...
you place the accent differently.
Yeah.
Everything.
Yeah. I use a word in the wrong way because I thought it had a different meaning, right? People do that all the time. There are jokes about it. So, and if you learn a foreign language, it's impossible to speak it perfectly. Nobody speaks a foreign language perfectly. There's just no such option. If you speak it perfectly, that means it's not a foreign language.
Yeah, you're a native speaker.
Yeah.
You were born there, you grew up there.
So it's normal to make mistakes as long as you're being understood and as long as you understand what's spoken to you, right? Or whatever you're reading, however you're consuming the language. But it's okay if you want to improve on it, right? It's okay if you want to learn the grammar. It's okay. Both things are okay. It's okay not to speak perfect English, and it's okay to want to speak perfect English, right? Because it's not your goal. You're never going to get there, but it's okay to want to improve, right? And so that's why I wrote my book about grammar.
We're going to be talking about this because I think it can be intimidating for people, the grammar aspect. So how do you... It's the first time I see this book.
Okay, good, because you don't need it.
I just wonder, because as I said, it can be intimidating. It used to, for me, it was also the case that like I struggled with grammar. I didn't like the aspect of grammar. For me, it was just intimidating. What can you learn from your book? What can somebody expect when they get this book? Is there a methodology that you use when you explain grammar? What's up?
Right.
This is the book. I'm going to show it.
Yes, thank you very
There's
much.
2 editions, correct?
Damien has not been paid to promote this
I have
book.
not been paid.
Nope.
Perhaps I should have.
Well, too late for that.
Anyways, please tell us what's it about?
Right. So it's about English grammar, which sounds very boring and very unsexy.
That's another thing.
And I still don't think it's sexy, but it can be not boring. I never struggled with grammar because I had a marvelous teacher. She was able to explain it to me in a way that was simple, that was logical, that made sense. And that doesn't mean that I never made mistakes. It just means that it was easy for me to learn. And because I didn't study English at school, so I never had anyone to talk to about English because we were studying German in my elementary school. And so when I was talking to, as a teenager, as an older person, when I was talking to other people about their learning experiences, I was surprised that they had a different, experience, right? So I figured, okay, so either I was lucky, or I'm exceptionally smart, which I didn't believe, or I didn't really find another option. So I guess I was lucky. I was lucky to have a teacher that was able to explain it to me the way that was just simple to digest. So what I did was I tried to explain it in the same way when I became a teacher. So when I was teaching English to Polish learners of various levels and ages, I explained, especially the grammatical tenses, because that's what people keep shuddering on the thought of. I just used very, very simple terms and very simple words and simple examples, and examples that were fun and, unconventional. And I made them imagine situations that would never happen, because if you make it fun, if you make it into a joke, or if you make it into a funny story, then that sticks in your memory. Right? You develop feelings towards it. When it's emotionally positive, then it's easier to remember. It's more fun. When you like your teacher, you like the subject that they're teaching. So I discovered after a couple of years of teaching that it works. And after my YouTube channel became popular, I decided that maybe it's the way to also explain it to a wider audience, right? Because I do it in my private lessons, or I do it in the language school that I'm working in. And I can write a book and more people can benefit the work that I'm doing, right? And apparently it makes sense. It doesn't say on the cover because I think I brought an older edition, but the newest edition says that we have sold over 150,000 copies.
It says 125,000.
Right,
here.
so this is an older edition. It's now 160,000, yeah, in almost 7.5 years, because it came out September 2017. And people are still buying it. People are still learning English and they still want to improve their grammar. And I'm very happy about it. I'm happy it works because the way that I do it is it's very simple. It's fun. It's not technical. It's not supposed to be intimidating. It's not supposed to be impressive. My aim as an author is not to appear smart or appear intellectual. My job is to explain things in the way that they are understood. And if it works, then I'm happy.
I think it's also about meaningful connection, finding those associations, like, as you said, it has to be enjoyable. People need to, relate to it in some way. I don't know if there's a storytelling here, probably there is, but they have to associate with it. It cannot be boring, as you said, right?
Right. This particular book is not about stories. My next book is about stories.
All right.
So the one where you can expand your vocabulary and just learn how to speak freely and fluently in many everyday situations. This is more about finally understanding something that has been explained to you before, but you could never get it. And you will finally get it this time. And you'll also enjoy it because there are jokes in the book. There are references to movies, TV shows. There are songs that I quote. So if you think about a song that you've heard 20 times before and you never paid attention to the words, and I finally, take out this fragment that is using the tense that I'm teaching, and you're like, oh my gosh, I never thought about it, right? Or I never noticed that. And that's something that sticks.
Moving on to the next one, we touched upon the topic of teachers. I want to stick to that. So teacher is the best source of learning a language is another statement I have.
A teacher is the best
Is the
source?
best source of learning a language.
Sometimes. Yeah, not necessarily.
It depends. And teacher cannot do all the work.
Of course.
Meaning it's important for guidance, right?
Yeah.
And
Especially at the beginning.
The first phase of learning. But it's the learner's effort. It's the practice. It's really being consistent
Yeah.
with that. And it's this intrinsic motivation. It's the theme that's
Right.
popping up in my head, at least when I think of that. Right. We debunked that. Last one. If you don't start learning a language as a child, it's too late.
How old were you when you started learning?
Like 12-ish,
You said you had your first lesson at 9.
9-ish, but then I didn't learn.
That's okay, but it's like you had your first meeting
Yeah,
with English
9-ish.
at
yeah.
9, right? Yeah. So same. My first English lesson was when I was 9 and a half to be exact. Now it's a common practice to start teaching children who are much younger, and it's okay, but you don't have to do it. You can still learn a language very well, fluently, if you start a little bit later than we do now, and we are examples of that. But when we start before the age of 12, then that's the crucial stage. If you want to make sure that you speak the language in a way that sounds a lot like the natives speak it, right? Because at the age of 12, there's a shift in your brain that kind of separates the hemispheres.
So there's biological explanation behind it.
Yeah. When it's after that age, it's more difficult to imitate and hear the sounds as well. So to put it in simple words. But it doesn't mean that it's impossible. I know people who started learning at 50. And you need just a couple of years to be at a level that allows you to communicate freely.
And perhaps methodology, right? Because when we think of children, it's more of a subconscious, sometimes unconscious way of learning things. For us, we need more, I would say,
Structure.
refined structure,
Yeah.
sophisticated ways, because we think logically about stuff.
Yeah,
Right?
It is my experience that usually adults will ask the most questions, right? They'll ask questions about details, like why is it the? What's the for, right? What does it mean? And kids won't ask that. They will just accept the fact that it's a whole phrase and you remember it as it is, and they copy it and they don't really think about it, right? Depends on the kid, obviously, and depends on how old they are, because a 4-year-old will not ask the same questions as a 10-year-old.
Obviously.
But the one thing that they have in common, I think, is that we all like to have fun when we study. And we shouldn't forget that when we stop being kids, we still deserve to have fun, and that having fun while learning works. So we shouldn't think of it as being childish or not serious enough. You know, I don't mind having a laugh during a lesson, or I don't mind making
Crack a
jokes,
joke
or
every now and then.
or playing with the words, you know, or making myself laugh. I do it all the time. I'm the person who laughs most at my jokes. Okay, so that means I'm funny. So it just helps.
Yeah. One of the most common questions I receive from my students, because I also have a small group of students, is what is the best way to learn a language?
There is no best way.
That's what I always say. It's a theme that's repeating over and over again. And there is no one-size-fits-all approach to begin with.
Yeah.
There is different methods. For me, I think the best way is to try out some of them and see what's best for you.
Yeah.
Kotarski, let's stick with that. He gave some methods about learning, and one of
13
them is...
of them.
13. One of them is dancer method, metoda tancerki. So it's about spacing out learning over time, allowing yourself to forget, and then trying to remember it again. So we can see that it's an ongoing process. We have a short-term, a long-term memory. We also need to distinguish. And it's repetition, baby.
Yep.
It's repetition. That's
why we, sorry to interrupt.
No, go
That's
ahead.
why we don't forget when we start learning English and then we take a break right, from English, we don't forget those very basic words. Like we don't forget words like book or table or man or girl, right? Because we use them so much that they seem obvious, right? It's the same reason why when you have a memory loss, you don't forget your own name, right? You have repeated it so many times that it's etched in your brain. So it's the same case with learning a language. The words that you don't use a lot, you will forget. It's muscle memory. I mean, no, it's not really muscle memory. Muscle memory is the other way around, is when it's kind of automatic, right? What I mean is it's like training a muscle. So if you stop going to the gym, the muscle will not be as strong, right? And it's the same with the connections in your brain.
And I'm so sick of watching those videos on YouTube saying that this is najlepsza metoda języka angielskiego. And then they go and they talk about these methods. And every method is different, obviously, but this is the best one. And then people buy this product, they buy this shit. And, they think this is a magical recipe. It's a magical product that it's going to make them speak like a native. It's not the case. We're bombarded with those ads, with those ideas that something is the best. First of all, it's very subjective. Second of all, as we said, it's not a thing as a best method, right? Would you agree with that? Did you agree with that?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think my book is pretty good. It's not going to work for everybody, but it has worked for a lot of people.
Yeah.
So if you're a lot of people, it will work for you.
And to this question, like, what's the best method? I always say, I have my theory also about it. Like, for me, context is crucial. I always say that to students or to people who ask me this question, is that if you learn a word, you always need to place it in the context, in a sentence. Yeah. First of all, you see if it's a noun, if it's adjective, if it's a verb, and then you place it because that's the synapse. That's what happens in your brain, that right? Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we remember certain word or expression if it's based in a context.
Because you associate new information with the old information that you have in your brain. It's like you're expanding your knowledge. It's not like this is your knowledge now, and now this is your new knowledge, and they're not connected. They have to be connected. Otherwise, it just doesn't make sense. It doesn't make a system. Language is a system. Right? Things are interconnected all the time. So if you just remember a single word individually without a context, it's easy to forget. It's not impossible, but it's very easy to forget.
And again, another thing is translating things directly. It's what we're used to, because we do it because it's easier for us to translate things directly. It's not the case.
I wouldn't say that it's such a bad idea, but it's not the only way to learn. It's one of the ways to learn. Some words have to be translated. Like if you have a list of trees, right? You can define every single word in English. Like if you're at an advanced level, usually your classes are in English and there's hardly any Polish being spoken in the class, right? So when you ask your teacher, okay, what is a spruce tree? And they will say, well, it's a kind of tree that doesn't lose its leaves in the winter, and it looks like this. They can show you a picture. But if you're not a tree expert, or at least good at trees, you're not going to know what it is. But if they tell you the Polish equivalent of the word, then it becomes obvious.
But this is more of a technical thing, I would say. Like, I think words have also different connotations, and there is a cultural influence that affects it. Words. That's how I see it. I cannot give you now an example, but sometimes I catch myself translating things and I'm like, okay, but this is the direct translation. But then there's another one which just fits better what I have in mind and what this phrase represents.
Right. So what I think you're talking about is how we shouldn't translate things word by word, because a foreign language has a different structure than our language, and that seems natural. What I'm trying to say is that you shouldn't avoid translating, okay? Translating is a job. People get paid very well to be good translators, right? It's actually one of the most stressful and well-paid jobs, for example, in the European Parliament, right? A translator, especially if you're an oral translator, and you can work only 2 hours a day, and you can work at 20-minute stretches at a time. right? That's why translators usually, or interpreters, I should say, they only work in pairs because they have to switch, right? A translator cannot work for a full hour because it's so stressful and it's so demanding. So it's not wrong to be able to translate. We translate all the time. We translate movies, and you said you translate songs on TikTok, right? So
you have to call it out.
We don't avoid translation. Translation's good.
That's true.
And it's useful, but it shouldn't be our only source of information.
That's, I
and
think,
it shouldn't
where I was
be,
getting
yeah,
at.
it shouldn't be our foundation. But that's what you do at the very beginning, because when you start learning, you usually start learning in your native language, right? And you learn single words in a foreign language because you want to avoid the immersion or the submersion, right?
And consequences that go with it.
Yeah, so step by step, you learn new words. And after a while, after a couple of lessons maybe, only then are you able to say a full sentence in a foreign language. But most of your lesson is in your own native language, right? I remember the first 5 words I learned in my first English lesson. They were see, they were egg, easy. I know that there was a first name. The name was Peter because there was a Peter in the text that I can't remember the 5th one. So 4 words. I remember the 4 words. And of course, when I noted them down, I wrote them down as English word dash Polish word.
Yeah.
How else would I know what they mean, right? I could make a cartoon or whatever, right? But it's easy. It's easy to
Especially
translate.
at the beginning.
Yeah. And if it's a simple word like table, right?
You touched upon we touched upon vocabulary and how, you mentioned those 4 words. So let's perhaps make a smooth transition and move into that, because you wrote a book, Władaj I Gadaj. And it's a book where you describe methods for learning and memorizing vocabulary. Also, I want you to tell us, perhaps you can share one method of memorizing vocabulary. I have mine. I did, I'll share with you after you. But.
So the methods that I've used in that book and the methods that are presented in the exercises are the same methods that Radek Kotarski described in his book. Actually, we collaborated when I was writing that book. We wanted to make sure that it all makes sense, that that if someone has read his book, they'll be able to follow my book as well using the same methods. The methods have been studied by scientists. They're proven that they work. Radek himself experimented on himself, and he taught himself Swedish in like 6 months, right? That's what he describes in the book too, using these methods. That was kind of an experiment that he did, which he didn't know how it would turn out when he started writing. So it turned out well, thankfully, and the book it was possible to release it. So one of the methods that I like to use on a daily basis is when you have learned a word, to make sure that you remember it, you try to make a sentence with the word yourself. So you engage your creativity. And you also make sure that the sentence is as ridiculous, funny, silly, out there as possible.
Putting it in a context.
Yes, but make sure that the context is weird, because that's what will make you remember the word better. Like if you, also the context shouldn't be too general. Like I remember when I was taking the classes in a foreign language school when I was like 17 or 18, we had the same homework every time, right? So the teacher would tell us, okay, then go home and make like 5 or 10 sentences with the words that you've learned today. And he said, if the word is house, don't write, this is a house, or I have a house. Because first of all, that sentence doesn't explain what the word means. So that's always helpful. And also just make it more challenging, right? So my house is on fire is better because it's an
you have association with fire, something going on.
There's emotions. It's an unusual situation, right? So I like to give an example of the word cabbage, right? Which is a vegetable. And you can, of course, say, I like cabbage, or I hate cabbage, or cabbage is my favorite vegetable, but that's boring. You're not going to remember it. So what I will say is, last night, some aliens came over and they stole all my cabbage.
Very specific.
Yeah.
But that works, right? For the brain.
That works.
Yeah.
So this is the kind of method that I also used in the grammar book, because some of the first exercises in every chapter are rote exercises, which means that you have to keep repeating the same thing enough times to make yourself remember, like the structure of a sentence. But then once the structure is mastered and you don't have to think about it too much, you can engage in more creative exercises, and those will usually include examples that are not so obvious and that will make you think or smile or feel something or remember something.
Emotions.
Yeah, or associate with another memory you have, and it just works better.
Your content also focuses on translating expressions from movies. And I always tell to people that this is a nice way to learn, because you get to see get to hear this authentic language, not old-fashioned. It's language that is actually used and spoken.
Yeah.
What's good about learning this way? It's a question I have. Do you agree that learning through movie helps to understand the real world language? Because we need to distinguish, right? I feel like many times we're bombarded with this old-fashioned English that we don't use in the books. I'm not associating it with any book, but you see my point. I think you see my point.
Well, so books are very specific in terms of the quality or the standard of language that is being used, right? Books are art. And sometimes the author will try to impress you with their language, right? When you look at the books written by Nobel Prize laureates, they aren't written in simple language. This is not what is being rewarded, right? So when you read a book in a foreign language, that means that you're at a very advanced level of proficiency. Because even if you read a book in Polish, especially if it's fiction, the language is not the same as the one that we use on a daily basis, right? There's more complicated vocabulary, the sentences are longer, there are artistic means that the author uses to make it more interesting or more emotional, right? So reading a book is one story. Watching a movie is, first of all, closer to real life, because you listen to dialogue, right? This is how we use a language. We usually speak the language. Most of the language that we use, and I'm not talking about foreign language, I'm just talking about language in general. Most of the language that you use on a daily basis is spoken language. You talk to people, or you talk to yourself, right? Or you talk in your mind, in your thought to yourself. So you get a glimpse of how people do it in the language that you're learning. You can listen to various dialects,
accents,
various forms of speaking, various ways of talking, be it a dialect or someone speaks more slowly than another person. Like if you listen to the audiobook by either Barack or Michelle Obama, who have written many books, each of them, they read the book themselves. So they recorded the audiobook, and they are very easy to follow because they read them very slowly. And it's not because they try to make it easy for the listener. It's just the way that they talk, right? And I think it's because they are experienced public speakers. They know that they're addressing different kinds of people. They know that they're addressing crowds. So you have to talk in a certain way in order to be understood by a crowd, which usually has a noise around it. And, you know, people in the back have to be able to understand you as well. You're not just talking to the front row. So if you want to start listening to audiobooks, I suggest Michelle Obama.
I'll definitely give it a try.
Yeah.
Haven't
it's
listened
wonderful.
to it.
It's wonderful. It's very inspirational, and it's also easy to follow. But another thing is that when you watch a movie, you don't feel like you're learning.
It's enjoyable, right?
It's not a formal learning situation, right? You're just having fun. You're just relaxing. You're just chilling, right? So the fact that it's in English and you can help yourself with English subtitles if you have trouble following just the English dialogue, it kind of happens on its own. It kind of happens without you knowing it, right? That's how I practiced my German. I had been studying German only in school for 2 or 3 years when my parents installed cable TV, which included, the majority of it was German-speaking channels. And at the time, we didn't have access to English-speaking materials in any way, in any video form. I think there were only 2 English-speaking channels by my cable provider. And one of them was news, which was super boring. The other was like stock market information. And once in a while, there was a sitcom that they broadcast.
Yeah.
And for me, that was just so new and so fresh
Game changer.
and so valuable that I was able to finally listen to a storyline being told in English. And the first sitcom that I watched in English was Full House, which I also recommend because it's an old story. It's directed at families, so they have to use simple language, simple jokes. It's not crude, it's not vulgar, so it's safe to watch with your kids. And they speak slowly, clearly, and it's easy to follow.
It's about the diversity, I think. When you watch the movie, you're exposed to different accents, as we said, different ways of speaking. And also, you learn that there's no one correct way of saying things.
That's right.
Which brings me to another thing I wanted to discuss. Is there such a thing as having a perfect accent?
Well, you can sound a lot like the native speaker. I'm not saying it's perfect. It can be near perfect, right? I don't like the word perfect because perfect means that you are aiming for it. Like you want to get there. You don't have to be perfect to be
Never
good.
perfect to begin with.
Exactly. Nobody's perfect, right? So the reason why I talk about speaking correctly, be it in terms of pronunciation or the meaning of words or the structure of a sentence, is that the more correctly you speak, the easier it is for the other person to understand you, right? When you make a mistake, the other person has to have the half a second to process what you're saying and to make sure that they get it, right? It requires less thinking if you are speaking correctly for the person that you're talking to.
My question stems from the fact that I do believe in a society there is this perception of like, I want to speak perfectly. I want to like express myself in the best way possible. And that's problematic.
Best way possible is great.
Right?
But perfect? I don't think it's possible.
Let's embrace imperfection. That's also what we're here for. And what I do with my podcast is that I have different guests and we hear different accents. There's also place for mistakes and all that. So that's my philosophy. That's how I see it. And I would love for people to know that, because it's a change of a mindset also. You see what I mean? I think we're wired in a way, maybe this is an overstatement, but we try to obtain this perfect vision of talking, like let's say royal family, you know, like you want to sound like them, but then there's 40 different dialects in Britain and way more in the US. So no, I just want to end on that note that let's embrace imperfection, and
because there's no such thing as perfection.
There you go. I like the sound of that. What is it that you love the most about the English language?
I like the fact that I'm able to watch a movie without having to wait for a translation. So I can watch it now because I'm impatient, and I'm able to understand a song that I'm listening to, and that I don't have to worry about translations being available, whether it's a book. Like I've read a lot of books as soon as they came out because they were written in English originally, and I didn't have to wait for them to be translated. So I think that's what I enjoy in my personal experience today. I enjoy the fact that I can work in a job that I love. I find a lot of satisfaction in the fact that I can help people speak better English. It gives me a lot of joy.
Satisfying, isn't it?
Yeah, makes me feel like I'm making the world a better place, because I'm not fixing the whole world, but I'm fixing a lot of the world for a specific person. I'm changing their life for the better, I think, because they're happier with their skill level or with themselves, or I'm helping them raise their self-esteem. You know, it works on a lot of levels. So I enjoy being useful and helpful, and I enjoy myself on the way because I like to have fun with language.
This is an important aspect, huh?
Yeah.
To really enjoy the ride and just enjoy it.
Yeah, so I'm having fun.
For me, I like the fact that it's inclusive, that language is, I find it way more inclusive than English in some instances. It also comes with the fact that like many ideas derive from US. So for example, to give you an example, right? My previous guest, we talked about body generosity and body positivity. For me, ciało życzliwość, I never even heard of that. You see what I mean? I feel like there's way more room in English language. It's also the people. People make up the language for those inclusive expressions. And that's what I like about this language. I love it from the bottom of my heart. Look, your youngest viewer is 7 years old and your oldest is 70.
That's what they wrote. We don't know what the truth is, but that's what they admitted to.
How do different groups react to your content? Because that's such a diverse group.
Like everybody.
How do they react? Because there must be different reactions. Or how... Yeah. I was just intrigued by this fact, and I had to bring it up. Because that's 7 and 70. There's 1 0. Like, you see?
Yeah, that's like 4 generations. Well, first of all, almost nobody admits how old they are when they're writing a comment, right? So whenever I read a comment, I never know exactly who it's from. I don't know if it's a man or woman or otherwise. I don't know if it's a young person or old person. I don't know how they speak English, right? I don't know where they're from. I know hardly anything about the person. So when they share that with me, only then do I know who they are, more than on average. So whenever kids comment, they will sometimes write that they are using their dad's profile, right? And that they really enjoy it. And they're very kind. They're very polite, which I like. Although, I do get some hater comments too, and I never know if they're from kids or whoever, 60-year-old man. I never know that. But if they admit their age, they're usually very kind. Older people, like teenagers, will usually get more active in springtime when it's time for finals in school. So then they will come back to some of my older videos and they use them as revision. I had someone comment the other day that they are rewatching my video about phonetic symbols because they study English at university and they have a test coming up on phonetics. So that was fun.
So different reactions from different
very different reactions. Older people, like I'm saying, like 60 plus people will usually write longer comments, longer messages.
More personal, perhaps? Storytelling, stories?
They do like telling stories, yeah. They usually have a lot of gratitude and they have, they're very thankful for the fact that they were able to study at a later age when usually it is believed that there's a certain time when it's too late. I don't think it's ever too late to start learning or to come back to learning. So yeah, the reactions vary. They're very, very different. But I read every single comment. I sometimes respond. Depends on how much time I have and whether it's worth my time. I try to moderate the comments. So I will either ban users that are aggressive or violent. I have a filter. I have a list of filtered words. I sometimes come back to that list to have a little fun because it's like a very, very long list of curse words. Right? If you go through it one by one, they're in alphabetical order. They look really funny. So some of the comments are filtered automatically. And I treat it as a zero tolerance policy so that people know, so that people know that, first of all, this is my piece of the internet and like this is my home. And if you enter my home, I don't want you to be rude.
It's my rules you should abide by.
Yeah.
Right?
And I don't like, screaming. I don't like being screamed at. I don't like being insulted. I try to be polite to everybody. So you can just do the same. And I also think the world is a better place if we're kind to one another. So I like to promote kindness. And I also want other people to see that, first of all, I see you. I see what you're doing, right? And I don't allow that. And I also want them to know that there are certain rules. And if we all stick to the rules, then
the world would be a better place.
Yeah,
right?
and we'll feel safer.
Partnerem podcastu jest Tutlo, szkoła angielskiego online, która tak jak ja pomaga przełamywać bariery w mówieniu.
the last thing I want to discuss is the educational system.
Oh,
And in the past, you've taught at schools. I haven't, but I finished high school not long ago, 7 years ago. So I have an understanding of what's going on there. I also do tutoring. So I have a student, and we did she has an oral exam. She had an oral exam coming up, so she had the list of 20 themes that we wanted to discuss, and we focused on that. But then she told me that during class there is not much focus on speaking, that they're not getting prepared for that. So she had to look for help outside of the classroom. And I did my best. I for each theme, I did like a reading. I wrote a script, a reading about this theme. I chose different vocabulary based on her level. So we managed. She passed. But what I'm trying to say is that there isn't much opportunity to practice speaking at schools. Mm-hmm. This is overgeneralization, perhaps. Might be exceptions from the rule. But would you agree with that? What would you have to say about that?
Yeah, I definitely agree. I don't think language is being taught in Polish schools the way that it's supposed to be taught. I don't think it's being taught efficiently, because if it were, then after, 12 years of studying elementary and high school altogether, we should be able to speak fluently. I don't really see a lot of 18-year-olds or 19-year-olds being able to speak fluent English. And it should be working, right? Because we start at the age of 3.
Yeah. But the statistics speaks for them. They speak for themselves.
Yeah. So there's definitely a need for change. And I have been to the Ministry of Education recently, and I know that changes are coming. So that's good. Yeah. So I'm very excited about that. That's one of the most serious issues, one of the most serious mistakes that is being made in the public educational system. When it comes to teaching foreign languages, not enough room for speaking. But I know where it comes from.
Tell us.
So the curriculum is overloaded. Right? So if you want to keep up with the material, you have to keep going. You have to move to another subject lesson by lesson, because otherwise you won't have the time to finish what you're supposed to do until the exam, right? I think we have too many tests and too many exams. I think the one exam that you have at the age of 19 is enough. You don't have to have any exams before that.
Along the way,
And the mistake that I think is being made is that we teach for the exam, and especially for the written exam. So we don't really teach people to talk, right? We don't teach them to use language on a daily basis. We teach them to write an email, or to write a letter, or to write a story, or to write a review, right? How many reviews have I written in my life? In any language, right? 2, maybe?
No.
When I hated a movie or a concert or a service. There should be more room for speaking, but the reason why there is not enough speaking is because there isn't enough time. And also the teacher who would do a speaking class, like a conversation class, doesn't really have anything to support the class. Like, what did they write in their journal or the documentation, right? Conversation. That seems casual. That seems like we didn't really do anything, right? Because talking is nothing. Right? While it's the other way around. It's the most important thing when you study a language. So there should be more speaking. There should be less focus on exams, on grammar. The grammar should be taught in a different way than it is now. It should be made more fun and simple and more basic, right? We don't need all the 16 tenses when we graduate high school. There aren't really 16, but let's just simplify, right? We used to study that it was 16. If we switch to another approach, if we approach language as a communication tool and not just another subject in the school, then it should get better.
What you said is crucial, because it's a systematic problem, meaning it comes from outside of teachers. How do I put it? I feel like teachers are often also the scapegoat of the whole situation, meaning they need to balance between expectations from different stakeholders.
Yeah.
You have headmaster, you have parents, you have students. Yeah. You said it in the interview. It's I like the analogy, Bermuda Triangle.
Yeah.
And how do you balance it out to meet expectations of all the stakeholders. It's impossible.
You're not going to do it. You're not going to. If you meet other people's expectations, you're losing yourself in the situation, right? And if you want to be true to yourself and do whatever you think is right, somebody else is not going to be happy. So I think it's a very hard job, being a teacher in general and a teacher of English. Well, that's my experience only. I know that it's a hard job.
But the changes are coming.
Yep.
I like the sound of that.
Yep.
Thank you from the bottom of my heart for doing all the work that you do. We will be wrapping up. At the end, I always ask for a piece of advice that you have for our viewers.
Like a life advice, or
you do whatever you want to do with it. We touched
so many
upon
things.
many important issues, so we can go back to that. But perhaps there's one thing you want to share your wisdom.
Well, I'm not going to pretend I'm a philosopher. So, like, to sum up what we said, I would say that as long as you have fun doing it, make sure you have fun. So if you want to learn a language, do it in a way that is fun for you. Play games in the language, watch movies in the language, make friends in the language, comment on your heroes' Instagram accounts in the language, right? Read Wikipedia articles
Make
in
it
the language.
enjoyable, right?
Yeah, just make it fun. As long as it's fun, it'll be working.
Thank you so much for coming by. It's
Thank
been
you.
a pleasure. Mameto.
Thank you.